for community, and that deepens and strengthens the direct action tradition. Okay. What we're also going to do, though, I've been going to a series of meetings in Paris and in London and so on, and talking to people in many parts of the world in the last few weeks and months. What we're going to do in the campaign against climate change, we're saying it's now time to act. It's now time to come back. Over the fall, we're going to have a series of local meetings everywhere we can have them, and bring all of the environmental organizations and the unions and so on together. We're going to have what we hope is a pretty big demonstration in London on the 7th of March next year. But also, in the lead up to the Paris, the UN climate talks in Paris in 2015, are going to produce the final international agreement on controlling emissions. That agreement is going to be terrible. That agreement is going to put us on course for 4 degrees rise. It will last until 2035. That agreement will look like the door being slammed. And so we have to think, what do we do so we do not come out of that as we came out of Copenhagen? The way that people are putting it in France, the civil society organizations, is they're saying, we need something like Seattle. Maybe in 1999, maybe not the exact form of what people did in Seattle, but they say what we need is something that says, not this is the end, but this is the beginning of a mass global movement. What we're talking about in the campaign against climate change, and what we have been talking about in meetings in Paris with the large meetings of all the different civil society organizations, is trying to close down Paris. Not from the outside, but trying to get the people of Paris to close down Paris, to do what they do when they have a big protest in India or Bangladesh. It's called the Bund, and you close the colleges, you close the schools, you close the workplaces, you close the streets. You stop the buses and the trains and the cars, and when they do it in Calcutta, the children play cricket in the great avenues of Calcutta because nothing is moving. That would be big enough. That would be big enough to tell the world. But it's quite a visionary thing to do, and it sounds insanely ambitious, and it's very scary for the big organizations, for the Greenpeaces, for the unions, and so on. It's a scary thing to do. So what we've talked about in Paris and what we've got as a strategy is to start in the next year by arguing for student occupations in the universities in Paris. But to make it easier for them to do it in Paris, we'll do it in England too. And Scotland and Wales, we've been talking to people in Norway. We'll try and do it all across every country that we can do it. Have just one day student occupations, not 50 people in an admin block, but take over the university, have a whole day of teaching about climate change in every faculty and so on. And then come out in the streets and ask other people to join us. It won't, I have no idea how big it will be in Britain. The key is, but it will be something. But the key is to get really big action in Paris. I don't know how big we'll be able to do it, but I think we're in with a chance. We're in with a chance of having something there that's big enough that sends people home saying, okay, 5 minutes, that sends people home saying, now, country by country, we fight for 2 things. One is, leave the oil in the ground. The oil in the soil, the coal in the ground, and you shove the gas up your ass. That's the first thing. So we leave the carbon in the ground, and we can fight for that. We can fight for that well by well. And we pressure every government to have a massive program of climate jobs. When you were talking about how fast we have to do this, I mean, I've been editing the new edition of that booklet, and we've got a plan there for, in 20 years, we're going to reduce CO2 emissions by, with 1 million workers, by 80%. But the truth is also, with 2.5 million workers, we could do it in 10 years. And we've got 2.5 million unemployed. You know what I mean? When the world wants to do it, we can do it. And it's very important to say, this means jobs. Because when you say that the economy will collapse if we try to do this or whatever, then when we say, as people often do, to do something about climate change, we will have to sacrifice. That doesn't work. Ordinary people in this country and they have been asked to sacrifice too many times by too many politicians. We all know that what happens is we sacrifice and they don't. We have enough experience of that. But in the global south, the idea that workers and peasants in China or in India or street people in India would want to sacrifice. The beauty of campaigning for climate jobs is we say we get more jobs. Our people who aren't everybody else. I assume that everybody in this room knows somebody who is close to them who is out of work. Everybody does. Those people get jobs. It's not about a worse world, it's about a better world. And it's about a world in which we care for each other. I don't know, I'll end by saying this. I don't know if we can do this. I don't know if we can do what we're going to try and do in this country, in the demonstration, in the meetings, in the universities. I don't know what we can do in Paris. And maybe we can only get in the next year and a half part way towards what we want to do. And I don't know if we can stop the horror coming. But I do know that in the process of trying, we can change, I think, the conversation among the people we know, radiating outwards the conversation among the people in the world. From a conversation about it's every man and woman and family for themselves, to a view of the world that says we are all neighbors on this planet. And it's time to take care of each other.
Let's hope we have a nice, good discussion now. If anybody wants to know who's knocking nails into the wall next door, it isn't actually. I've just spotted the culprits. It's a couple of gulls up there back in the window. So I'm afraid there's absolutely nothing you can do about that. Okay, I'll leave the announcements until the end, so please don't all rush out when this is over. But is there anybody who would like to start off our discussion? One hand there.
Yes. One thing I know about governments and politicians is that they're not stupid, and they know everything that you've just told us.
Yes.
So my first question is, what are they doing and why are they doing it? I know you touched on that a bit, but I didn't quite follow what you said. And the second question is, if they are people of innate evil, what do we do when they shut down the internet?
Okay. Go.
My name's Steve Wallace. I'm a revolutionary socialist involved in that unity of the party. I mean, on the issue, I mean, there's a couple of things that I disagree with Jonathan, just sort of started a bit of controversy. That sort of, I mean, he argued specifically for solar and wind power, and I think there's a big problem with that, in that sort of, even if they are really sort of efficient, the message has not got out to people. And so you hear it in the media whenever these things get discussed, oh, we can't do these renewable forms of energy, it costs a lot more. And so if you argue on those terms, rather than say tidal power, sort of because we're an island nation and there's not been as much research and development, and there was actually an article in The Guardian in February about these new tidal lagoons, sort of coming in Swansea and sort of other places, which could, they sort of said in 5 places, could generate enough power to sort of meet 10% of Britain's energy needs. But one of the problems is they said they need subsidies, and sort of you don't know how big the subsidies are. According to my father, as a former scientific advisor and Friends of the Year, they had previously said without subsidies. But really, we need a sort of socialist approach, and sort of an internationalist approach. Concentrating solar power in deserts in Africa could actually export energy and actually provide power for villages and so on in Africa where they haven't got them, and sort of provide a sort of income. And I think but they have been trying in terms of capitalism, but the instability of regimes in North Africa basically sort of stops the companies investing in that. So just some controversies to point out.
Okay, thank you. I suppose I never gave people guidance, but if we keep contributions quite short, which has been very good so far, then we'll get more people in. Next person to speak is Martin.
I think the question asked right at the beginning is the crucial one, which is why aren't governments and people doing it? And I think that if we're honest, it's because those governments are governing not in the name of the people who are going to die in the first instance from climate change, they're governing in the name of corporations who are making money from inaction on climate change. Corporations that are locked in to a method of making money and profits from fossil fuel economies and so on. Just to illustrate that, there's an article in The Independent yesterday about El Nino. El Nino, the periodic oscillation in the Pacific Ocean that changes the weather around the globe. And it's talking about how in the next year there's an 80% chance of extreme weather as a result of this, far more extreme, particularly impacted on North America and Europe, droughts, heavy rainfalls, famines and so on. At the end of the article there's a quote, I'll read it to you. The futures markets are already bracing for global food shortages. The future market. There's nothing in it about the farmers in the Midwest, the hungry in the Sudan, the Sub-Saharan Africa. There's nothing in it about the unemployed people in Salford who will be worried about food rises, if we're absolutely honest. And this is the logic of the system. Even in a newspaper, actually, the Independent's very good on climate change by and large. You see, and what do we do? What do we argue as a climate movement, as trade unionists and socialists? That's the crucial thing, because the danger is we scare people. You terrify people, and we have to tell people the truth. We can't hide the truth about what's happening with global warming. But the danger is if you just do that, people will put their heads in the sand, they'll worry about what's happening to their kids. Quite logical, really. And that's why I think the approach we've done with the campaign against climate change and the climate job stuff is very, very important. Because it's about a bridge. It's about saying, as Jonathan did, if you're unemployed, we could give you a job doing this to help the environment and to improve your lives and the rest of it. The example I always use is about insulation. Pensioners freeze to death in Britain. There are unemployed young people. There are builders on the dole. There are leaking houses. Put it all together, a mass movement of insulated homes keeps people alive, reduces fuel bills, reduces emissions, and gives people jobs. Concrete. Everyone understands it. That's a bridge. It's about helping people draw the lines in the sand. But it's also, if we're absolutely true, it's also about helping people understand how they fight back and how they organise. Because that's the next step. Because if we don't get organised, if we don't start to fight for those things, they won't grant it from us from on high. It also means there's some very concrete things we have to do as a climate movement. It means that we have to go out there and argue these things. It means, for instance, next time the firefighters want to strike.
We've had speeches. My mind is boggling. I'm scared about this. Can you keep it brief and let the speaker reply?
Thanks. It's really helpful.
It's not helpful.
I would like to know.
What shame?
We have
I disagree with
speakers
this comment.
yeah, we'd
I
like
think
Martin to
we're all
finish.
saying
Yes,
it's
We'd like Martin to finish. Yeah, I think it's the length.
Martin, do you want time to finish?
Yeah.
Because people do want to hear
Very,
it.
very quickly then, because I think what we have to do, I'm sorry to the person who just started to speak, is we have to go out there and argue for this very concretely. It means when the firefighters are on strike, we should visit their picket lines and say, we need more firefighters. I'm a climate change activist. When the floods come, we need more firefighters. Will you come and be part of my campaign? I'm here to support you. We need to do that all around all the different campaigns, whether it's housing, whether it's unemployed workers, whether it's firefighters. Link the things to do. That's how we'll get the movement that can help us challenge them, and it's how we'll give ourselves confidence and for the future.
Yes.
There's only one word I wanted to mention, as TTIP, and I was wondering, I mean, things that terrify me, I thought fracking was pretty awful, but then I heard about TTIP, and you're quite right, you're just completely demoralised because you see this enormous monolith all around you, neoliberalism, and they're now linking hands right across the globe, and it's like a stranglehold. I just really feel it's like a boa constrictor. I was wondering whether, could we really organise against that?
Yes.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to briefly touch on the role of the banks, that I believe is, in the strategic sense, a very key component of this enormous challenge. Given what we've heard about, a response that's needed needs to be on a scale, a huge scale. It can't be little things, it has to be something very large. The truth of the system we're currently operating in means that for a large project to happen, it will require the banks to be funding and financing and investing in these types of things. The problem, as I see it, is that if they are to do that, the boardroom conversation will go along the lines of, well, we're already massively invested, directly and indirectly, in the current fossil fuel industry and everything that goes with that. Why on earth are we going to have to write off these mega billions or trillions, bankrupt ourselves in investment? So I think there needs to be a transition plan for tackling the banks, because otherwise there's no way that they're going to massively invest in a new way of doing things. Quantitative easing of some form, we buy toxic assets. We did it with the subprime issues, sort of like treating these fossil fuel investments as subprime toxic assets, which they are, but on a much larger scale. There needs to be some way of tackling the banking part of this problem.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Brown. I just want to pick up on Brigitte's question, because I think it's a very good question. How do we deal with what people very often talk about as the system? And I think the key thing to understand about it is that it is completely anarchic, and that there are sometimes, somebody wants to say, a band of hostile brothers. They don't actually complete unity with each other. They are constantly competing with each other, and not only in terms of corporations, but in terms of states as well. I mean, I think one thing that struck me, I'd like people perhaps to come back and comment on this. I was very impressed when I read recently that Germany last year had one day when 60% of their energy needs were met by renewables. You could come back on this. Now, that's only one day, but anybody who's been to Germany recently will have noticed that beside the motorways there are sort of just banks and banks of solar panels. They've clearly done a lot. But I would suggest that one of the reasons why that's happened is actually because of Germany's dependence on gas from Russia, and the fact that what we see now with the battle in Ukraine is they clearly do not want to have that dependence. And so we live in a world where everybody is watching these big powers fight it out with each other. I just think that the fact is that whereas they will never really agree with each other, we do have a real interest in agreeing with each other. We don't have these divisions. And so I think that is the basis of which we say to people, come on, we can cooperate to deal with this. We don't have, we're not people with the money, we're people who actually do the work.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes, Stephen?
Yeah, and just in terms of arguments in favour of our side, I used to be involved with the campaign for free public transport, which used to be based in Manchester. One of the things that we used to say, which is based on this argument, can we afford this, or, not enough money, we have to cut our cloth suits as finances, Maggie Thatcher started it. And I always used to say, how can we not afford it? Because I used to refer to Nicholas Stern, Lord Stern, who said in his report that it's going to cost us 20 times more in 10 years' time to have the same impact on the effects of climate change as addressing the issue now. And in simple terms, I used to say, somebody said your roof's knackered, so it costs you £1,000, fix it down, 10,000, 20,000 in 10 years' time. Most people will even take a loan out to fix the roof now. And this is an argument we should be using on our side. It's actually economic madness not to address the issue now, but it's going to cost us 20 times more in 10 years' time, even if we don't end up with a scenario that Jonathan painted.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Jess Snorthy from Stockport Green Party, and I was just referring to George Monbiot's book from 2006 when he was talking about 2030 and a 90% decrease in for our emissions. At what point did it change to 2050? It was very detailed. The work that ExxonMobil did and Philip Morris on actually creating research centres to denigrate some of the work that organisations such as yours, as the Tyndall Centre, which he respects and he uses in his research. I just wondered now just to ask you, well, if you have an idea of when that changed, and also if you could tell us more about your organisation and what role you have with government, whether you're listened to, whether you get funding, and these other organisations that he talks about which were set up specifically to try to deny the work that you're doing, whether you could just mention something about the research environment of your work. Thanks.
Did you want to say something?
You put your hand up just then.
Briefly. I'm just, I'm kind of also from the Stockport Green Party. I'm just really concerned, like you say, that the corporations do run the governments, and the governments are just puppets, really. And it's Rothschild mainly, isn't it, that they're the kind of, they run on the scale as in profit. And they keep on talking about New World Order. And there are these camps of frighteningly sort of setting up, so I completely agree what you're saying, that might happen. But it seems like they actually are trying to destroy the wealth. And that's what we've got to do, just to fight against that and educate. And I completely agree for the Paris Day. We all need to input on that day.
Yes?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, politicians in theory are supposed to serve us, and they haven't been serving us as far as I can remember.